The morning I found the first letter from the HOA stuffed in my mailbox was the day everything started to fall apart. I remember it clearly. The sun was warm on my back as I collected fresh eggs from my hens, their soft clucking always making me smile. Those chickens were like family to me. After 5 years on my small farm, my 6 acres of heaven sat just outside Pine Creek city limits. I grew the juiciest tomatoes you'd ever tasted, kept 15 happy chickens, and even had 2 goats that helped keep the grass trimmed. My grandpa left me this land when he passed, and I turned it into the farm of my dreams. The kind of place where fireflies danced at dusk, and the air smelled like fresh earth. I was here first. That was the important part. My farm existed long before the fancy houses of Oak Ridge Estates started popping up next door 3 years ago. These giant homes with perfect lawns and matching mailboxes didn't fit with my weathered barn and veggie gardens. But we all got along fine, at first, until Karen Whitfield moved in. "Is that your rooster making that awful racket at 5 a.m.?" Those were the first words Karen ever said to me. No hello, no introduction, just complaints about my animals. She stood at our property line, arms crossed over her expensive white blouse, her perfectly pressed pants looking like they had never seen a speck of dirt. "That's Harold," I said with a smile, trying to be neighborly. "And he's just doing his job. Farm animals make noise sometimes. That's country living." Karen's lips pinched together like she'd tasted something sour. "This isn't the country anymore. This is Oak Ridge Estates, and we have standards." I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to be reasonable. "Actually, my property isn't part of Oak Ridge. I was here before your development even broke ground. Different zoning laws apply to my land." She squinted at my chicken coop, my vegetable garden, and the small pile of compost near the fence. "We'll see about that," she said. "I'm on the HOA board now, and we don't allow unsightly farm activities that lower property values." I should have taken her more seriously. The letters started coming weekly after that. Official-looking papers with the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo at the top, listing violations on my property. Too many chickens, unsightly garden equipment, improper fencing. Each one threatened fines that I had no obligation to pay since I wasn't part of their HOA. I kept every letter in a folder, just in case. Something told me I might need them someday. Then came the complaints about smells. My compost pile sat far from any houses, but Karen insisted it was ruining her backyard experience. She called city officials about my goats. She photographed my property from the road, pointing at chicken feathers that dared to float over the property line. My other neighbors from Oak Ridge started acting strange too. People who used to wave now looked away when driving past. Mrs. Gonzalez, who had always bought eggs from me, stopped coming by. Only Lisa Martinez still smiled and chatted when she walked her dog past my place in the evenings. "Don't take it personally," Lisa told me one day, leaning on my fence. "Karen's been showing pictures of your farm at HOA meetings, saying it's a health hazard. Some people believe her, but others think she's just being difficult." "Can she really do anything?" I asked. "My property isn't even part of Oak Ridge." Lisa looked worried. "Just be careful. Karen's husband is friends with someone on the county zoning board. She's been talking about getting the boundaries redrawn." I didn't sleep well that night, or many nights after. The worst part was that I couldn't stay and fight. My mother's health had been failing for months, and she needed me. Every year I spent 2 weeks helping her after her treatments, staying at her house 3 hours away. I couldn't cancel this trip. She had no one else. The day before I left, I spotted Karen and 3 men in suits walking along my property line. They carried clipboards and pointed at different areas of my farm. When they saw me watching, Karen smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind that makes your stomach twist with worry. That evening, as I packed my bags, I took extra precautions. I asked my friend Miguel to check on my animals daily. I installed 2 security cameras pointing at the property line and the main areas of the farm. I even called the sheriff's office to let them know I'd be away and had concerns about trespassing. "Don't worry so much," Miguel said as he helped me load my truck the next morning. "What's the worst that could happen in 2 weeks?" As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Karen stood at the edge of her driveway, phone in hand, watching me leave. The sun glinted off something in her garage, large red containers lined up against the wall. If only I had turned around right then. If only I had stayed. But my mother needed me. And I had no idea that those 2 weeks away would cost me everything. I knew something was wrong the second I turned onto my road. The sky looked dirty, like someone had smudged it with a giant pencil. And that smell, like a huge campfire, but worse, much worse. My stomach dropped as I pushed my old truck to go faster. The closer I got to home, the stronger the burnt smell became. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Number, number, number. I whispered the words like a prayer, begging to be wrong, but I wasn't. When my farm came into view, I slammed on the brakes so hard my truck skidded. Dust and gravel flew up, but I barely noticed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The beautiful garden I had planted, seed by seed, gone. The chicken coop I had built with my own 2 hands, destroyed. My small red barn, where I kept all my tools and feed, nothing but a blackened skeleton against the sky. Everything was gone, just piles of ash and smoking wood where my life's work had stood only 2 weeks ago. I jumped out of my truck, leaving the door wide open, and ran toward what used to be my chicken coop. The smell of smoke burned my nose and throat. Henrietta, Cluck, Ruby. I called out their names, hoping by some miracle my chickens had escaped. Only silence answered me. I fell to my knees in the warm ashes, my jeans getting dirty and wet. 5 years of hard work, of waking up at sunrise, working until my muscles ached, all gone. The vegetable stands where local families would come to buy fresh produce, burned to the ground. The special area where I grew flowers for the farmer's market, nothing but dirt and ash. Even the wooden fence I had spent weeks building by hand, charred remains. The only thing left standing was my house sitting at the edge of the property, untouched by the fire. But what good was a house when everything that made this place a home was destroyed? A crunch of tires on gravel made me turn. A shiny white SUV, the kind that had probably never seen a dirt road in its life, pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped Karen Whitfield. She looked around at the destruction with what almost seemed like satisfaction. Behind her, a balding man in an expensive suit climbed out, carrying a leather folder under his arm. He walked with the confidence of someone who was used to getting his way. Karen tilted her head, studying the ruins of my farm. Then she smiled, a tiny, smug smile. Well, well, she said, looks like the farm problem has been taken care of. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What do you mean, taken care of? I demanded, my voice shaking. This is my property, my life. The man cleared his throat and stepped forward. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Gerald Thompson, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. He didn't offer to shake my ash-covered hand. While you were away, he continued, we held an emergency meeting about the situation your farm was creating for our community. Situation? I repeated, not understanding. Karen jumped in. The smell, the noise, the unsightly view, she said, waving a manicured hand at what used to be my farm. Do you know how much my property value drops just by being next to this? She wrinkled her nose as if the ashes of my dreams were some kind of inconvenience to her. Gerald nodded. We sent you 3 notices over the past week. I could barely speak. My head was spinning. I was taking care of my sick mother, I shouted, feeling my face burn with rage. I've been gone for 2 weeks. Not our problem, Karen said with a shrug. You should have made arrangements. Gerald opened his leather folder. According to HOA Bylaw 47B, after 3 unanswered notices, we have the right to take action to remedy any situation that affects community standards and property values. I stared at him. You have no right to touch my farm, I said, my whole body shaking. This land isn't even part of your development. I was here first. Karen's smug smile grew wider, her perfect white teeth gleaming. Actually, she purred, drawing out the word like she was savoring it. The county rezoned this area last month. Your little farm is now officially part of Oak Ridge Estates. She paused, letting the words sink in. Which means, she added, you're subject to our rules now. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Could this possibly be true? I had never received any notice about rezoning. Nothing. Not a single letter. So you burned down my farm? I could barely get the words out. You killed my animals, my voice cracked. That's illegal. That's criminal. Gerald adjusted his tie. We hired a contractor to remove the violations. The chicken coop, compost piles, and non-approved structures. If things got out of hand, he shrugged. Perhaps the dry conditions contributed to the spread. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Other neighbors from Oak Ridge Estates had gathered at the edge of my property. Some looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Others were nodding in agreement with Karen and Gerald. They were all in on it. I clenched my fists, breathing hard. "You can't do this," I said, my voice suddenly calm as shock set in. "I'll call the police." Karen laughed. "Go ahead," she said. "We have all the paperwork. We followed the rules." I started to say something else when a glint of metal caught my eye through the ashes, near what used to be the edge of my garden. My property survey marker, the one the county had placed years ago when I first bought the land. It was still firmly planted where it had always been, untouched by the fire. A tiny spark of hope flickered inside me. If the marker was still there in its original spot, then maybe— "I think you should leave now," I said quietly, not wanting them to see what I'd noticed. Karen laughed again. "Or what? You'll sick your chickens on us?" "Oh, wait. You can't." Something inside me snapped. I stood up straight, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, "You've made a huge mistake, Karen, and you're going to regret it." For just a second, I saw uncertainty flash across her face. Then Gerald put a hand on her arm and guided her back toward the SUV. "We'll give you some time to process this," he said smoothly. "You have 30 days to bring the rest of your property into compliance with HOA standards. The rule book is in your mailbox." As they drove away, I watched the other neighbors drift back to their perfect houses with their perfect lawns. All except one woman who hesitated. Lisa Martinez. She looked back at me with what seemed like genuine sadness in her eyes. I turned away and looked again at the survey marker, glinting in the sun. Something wasn't adding up about this zoning story, and I was going to figure out what it was. Even if it was the last thing I did. The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes as I sat surrounded by papers in my living room. My eyes burned from crying and lack of sleep. 3 days had passed since I found my beloved farm in ashes. 3 days of anger, heartbreak, and exhaustion. Sleep had become a stranger to me. My mind was consumed by one thought. They can't just burn down someone's property and get away with it. I whispered the words to myself as I flipped through yet another county zoning document, my fingers trembling as I reached for my coffee mug, my 5th cup today. And then, something caught my eye. Page 43 of the county records. I leaned closer, my heart racing. The boundary line. Karen had said the rezoning absorbed my property into Oak Ridge Estates, but here, in black and white, was the truth. The recent rezoning didn't include my entire property. I jumped up, knocking papers everywhere, and ran to my garage. Beneath a dusty plastic cover was the answer I needed, my original property survey. I unrolled it with shaking hands, my pulse pounding in my ears. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of my property formed a natural boundary that the rezoning specifically excluded. That meant I grabbed my phone and scrolled through old photos of my farm. The chicken coop, the vegetable garden, my small barn, all were on the eastern side of the creek. They burned down property that wasn't even in their jurisdiction. I gasped, the realization slamming into me like a punch to the gut. I needed more proof. As soon as the county office opened, I made the call. "This is Maggie from the county recorder's office," a friendly voice answered. "Maggie, I need confirmation about the rezoning of County Road 16 properties last month," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Specifically, the boundary line formed by Willow Creek." "Oh, that rezoning was very specific about natural boundaries," Maggie replied. "Let me email you the official maps right now." Within minutes, my printer hummed to life, spitting out documents that confirmed exactly what I suspected. The HOA had no authority over my farm. None at all. I didn't waste time. Still wearing my wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, I grabbed my documents and drove straight to the county sheriff's office. A fight I was ready to win. "I'd like to report illegal destruction of property," I told the deputy at the front desk. His eyes widened as I explained what happened and handed him my evidence. "Ma'am, this is serious," he said, immediately calling over another officer. "We need to take your statement and these documents." 2 hours later, I walked out with a case number and a promise of investigation. But I wasn't done. I knew that Oak Ridge Estates HOA held their monthly meetings on Thursday evenings. And today was Thursday. I stopped at a copy shop to make duplicates of every single document and then went home to shower and change. Tonight would be important. I put on my best jeans and a clean button-up shirt. Nothing fancy, but respectable. As I combed my wet hair, I practiced what I would say. At exactly 7 p.m., I walked into the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. About 30 people sat in neat rows, facing a long table where Karen and Gerald sat with 3 other HOA board members. Karen was in the middle of complaining about someone's unapproved mailbox color when she spotted me. Her eyes narrowed. "This is a private meeting," she snapped, cutting herself off mid-sentence. I smiled and walked straight to the front of the room. "Actually," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "as a property owner affected by HOA decisions, I have the right to attend." Gerald cleared his throat. "We hear from non-members at the end of the meeting." "What I have to say can't wait," I replied. Despite the pounding in my chest, I kept my voice steady as I turned to face the homeowners. "Did you all know that your HOA burned down my farm illegally, and that you might be personally liable for the damages?" The room fell silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming. "That's not true," Karen snapped, her face turning red. "Only partially," I interrupted, unfolding the official county zoning maps onto an empty chair in the front row. "The county rezoning specifically excludes the eastern portion of my property, where the creek forms a natural boundary." I pointed at the map. "Everything east of the creek, which included my chicken coop, garden, and barn, remained outside your HOA jurisdiction." People started murmuring. A man in a blue polo shirt stood up, frowning as he studied the documents. Gerald's face went pale. "We followed the zoning maps provided to us," he said weakly. I pulled out another piece of paper. Karen's hand-drawn map, the one she had submitted to the HOA. "This," I said, holding it up, "is not an official document. It's completely wrong." The murmurs grew louder. Lisa Martinez stood up. "Gerald," she said, crossing her arms, "did you actually verify the boundaries before authorizing this?" "Of course he did." Karen jumped to her feet, her designer bracelet jangling. "That farm was disgusting. Chickens making noise at all hours, that horrible compost smell. It was bringing down our property values." "Property values don't override the law," I said calmly. "And speaking of the law," I continued, "I filed a police report today." Karen's smug expression disappeared. "Your actions constitute illegal destruction of private property, criminal trespass, and animal cruelty for the chickens that died." "You can't prove we did anything," Karen shouted. "Oh, but I could." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The room fell completely silent as security footage played on the screen. A truck with Oak Ridge Estates, HOA, written on the door pulled onto my property. 3 days after I left town. The date and timestamp were clearly visible. "I have more footage," I said quietly, "and I've already spoken with 3 reporters who are very interested in how an HOA could make such a serious mistake." Lisa walked to the front of the room. "I motioned to immediately suspend any board members involved in this decision, pending investigation." "Second," called out the man in the blue polo. Karen's face turned from red to white. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "We were protecting our community." Gerald raised his hand weakly. "Perhaps we should consult our attorney before—" "Too late," I said. "My attorney will be contacting yours tomorrow. And just so you know, she specializes in property disputes and HOA overreach." I gathered my documents as the room erupted into arguments. Some residents shouted at Karen. Others demanded answers from Gerald. I walked calmly toward the exit, but Lisa caught up with me. "I'm so sorry about your farm," she said, touching my arm. "Thank you," I replied, "but this isn't over. They destroyed something precious to me, and they were going to make it right." I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing like crazy. 20 missed calls. The first one was from Lisa Martinez. "Have you seen the news?" she asked when I called back. "Your farm is the top story on every channel. People are furious about what the HOA did." I turned on the TV. There it was, my burned farm. A reporter stood where my chicken coop used to be, microphone in hand, speaking with a grave expression. "Local farmer returns home to find property destroyed by neighboring HOA. in what legal experts are calling a clear case of overreach and possibly criminal action. Before I could even process what I was seeing, my doorbell rang. A different reporter stood there, a camera crew behind her. "Can you tell us how it felt to see your farm destroyed?" she asked, shoving a microphone in my face. The story had gone viral. By noon, my quiet country road was lined with news vans. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors I had never even met called to offer help. Someone started an online fundraiser for me. It hit $10,000 in just 3 hours. I sat at my kitchen table, my hands shaking, as my cousin Janet, who also happened to be an attorney, spread out maps and documents in front of me. "The HOA messed up big time," she said, circling the creek on the map. "This natural boundary is clearly marked in the rezoning paperwork as the limit of their control. Everything east of the creek, which includes most of your farm, was never under their power. So they burned down property they had no right to touch?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "Exactly. And that's not just a civil issue. That's criminal destruction of property. A lawsuit that would break them. Janet helped me file a lawsuit naming the HOA, Gerald and Karen personally. By that afternoon, the sheriff delivered their court papers. I watched from my window as Karen received hers. She threw a fit right there on her front lawn, screaming that I was the one breaking the rules, not her. But that evening, my phone rang again. It was Tom Baker, a man who lived 3 houses down from Karen. "You need to see something," he said. "I have security cameras that point toward your property. I caught something disturbing." Tom sent me a video. The timestamp showed 6 a.m., the morning my farm burned down. A familiar white SUV parked near my property line. Karen got out. She was carrying something in her hands. "Was that a gas can?" "I didn't think much of it until I heard what happened," Tom said. "I've already called the police." Before I could even process this, someone knocked on my door. It was Gerald. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "The HOA board had an emergency meeting," he said, his voice shaky. "They've removed me as president. Everyone's panicking about your lawsuit." "They should be," I replied coldly. Gerald swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. "They want to settle," he admitted. "They're offering $50,000 to rebuild." I laughed. "My attorney says this is worth 10 times that amount," I said. "Please," Gerald begged, sweat beading on his forehead. "Many homeowners had nothing to do with this decision. They'll lose their homes if you push this." I stared at him. "You should have thought about that before you burned down my farm." Gerald hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "That's the thing," he said slowly. "The HOA only approved removing your compost pile and chicken coop. We hired contractors to do it properly." He looked around like he was afraid someone would hear him. But then, something happened. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked. Gerald looked away, lowering his voice. "Karen kept saying the contractors were moving too slowly. She disappeared for an hour that morning. When she came back, she seemed excited." My blood turned ice cold. "The fire started 30 minutes later," Gerald whispered. My mind raced back to Tom's video. Karen, the gas can. I took a slow, deep breath. "Are you saying Karen started the fire herself?" I asked. Gerald's face went pale. "I didn't say that," he muttered, "but the contractors swear they didn't start it, and Karen's been acting strange ever since." The evidence that would destroy her. After Gerald left, I called Janet immediately. She arrived within the hour, bringing a private investigator with her. "If what Gerald hinted at is true, we need to collect evidence quickly," the investigator, Mike, explained. "Security footage, witness statements, anything that shows Karen's movements that day." The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "Check the pond behind Karen's house. Look for evidence." It wasn't signed. Mike and I walked to the neighborhood pond. In the reeds, partially hidden, were 2 empty gas cans. "Don't touch anything," Mike warned, snapping photos. He called the police immediately. That afternoon, the police got a search warrant for Karen's home and car. I stood across the street watching as officers carried out bags of evidence. Karen stood in her driveway, screaming that I was framing her. But that night, things took another turn. A desperate move. At 2 a.m., my security camera caught someone sneaking onto my property. It was Karen. She was placing something near what remained of my barn. When police arrived, they found a half-empty bottle of lighter fluid. The officer looked grim. "We're taking her in for questioning," he said. As dawn broke, I sat on my porch, staring at the ruins of my farm. The land looked dead, but I knew, with care, it could grow again, just like my fight against the HOA. What looked like certain defeat was turning into something else entirely. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Janet. "Turn on your TV, now." I did. The local news was showing Karen being led away in handcuffs. The reporter's voice was clear. "HOA resident arrested on suspicion of arson in connection with farm property destruction." At that moment, Gerald's car pulled up. He stepped out, holding a thick folder. "What you don't know," he said, handing it to me, "is that Karen has been trying to buy your land for months." I opened the folder and saw Karen's name on business papers. Next to it was a map, showing luxury homes plotted over what used to be my farm. I felt nauseous. Was this about neighborhood standards, or was it about greed all along? I couldn't sleep that night. After everything I had learned, Karen's land deal, the hidden gas cans, the footage of her setting the fire, my mind wouldn't stop racing. At sunrise, I walked through the ashes of my beloved farm one more time. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal near where my back fence used to stand, my security camera. I had completely forgotten about it. It was damaged, but still intact. Could it have captured what really happened? My hands shook as I retrieved the camera and connected it to my computer. The final piece of the puzzle, I pressed play. The footage made me gasp. It showed Karen arriving early that morning, before any HOA contractors. She wore gloves and carried 2 red gas cans. The video clearly showed her pouring gasoline around my chicken coop, compost pile, and along the edge of my garden. Then she lit a match. The flames spread faster than she expected. Karen jumped back, looking scared for a moment before running to her car. 20 minutes later, a truck with Valley Landscaping arrived. The HOAs hired contractors. The men looked shocked at the blaze already consuming my farm, but instead of calling for help, they simply left. I grabbed my phone and called my attorney immediately. "I have proof," I said, my voice trembling with anger and relief. Karen deliberately set the fire herself. The HOA contractors didn't even do the damage. They just saw it happening and left. Janet's voice was calm but firm. "This changes everything," she said. "This isn't just property damage anymore. It's arson." Justice at last. Later that day, I sat across from Sheriff Davis as he reviewed the footage. His face grew darker with each passing minute. "I've known you for years," he finally said. "You've never caused trouble, but some folks just can't stand seeing others live differently." He shook his head. "I'll be paying Miss Whitfield a visit today." Word spread through town like wildfire. Within hours, my phone was ringing nonstop. News vans parked outside the ruins of my farm. I agreed to one interview. Standing tall among the ashes, I spoke into the camera. "I just want justice," I said, "and to rebuild what was taken from me." That evening, I watched from my kitchen window as police cars pulled up to Karen's house. They let her out in handcuffs. Neighbors gathered on their perfect lawns, watching in stunned silence. Karen's face burned red with rage, until she spotted the news cameras. Then she ducked her head and hurried into the police car. The lawsuit that broke the HOA. The following weeks passed in a blur of lawyers' offices and courtrooms. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming. Not only did I have the security footage, but her own text messages to Gerald revealed her plan. "I'll take care of the farm problem before the contractors arrive. They'll just think it was part of the cleanup." When Karen took the stand, her true colors came out. "That farm was disgusting," she shouted. "My property values were dropping every day. Someone had to do something." The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty. The fall of the HOA. My lawsuit against the HOA proceeded separately. With Karen's criminal conviction, they knew they couldn't win. They offered to settle. But I didn't want just any settlement. "I want enough to rebuild everything I lost," I told my attorney, "and I wanted in writing that my land will never fall under their control, no matter what rezoning happens in the future." The HOA board members looked pale as they signed the agreement. The amount they paid would increase everyone's HOA fees for years to come. A new beginning. Gerald approached me after the signing. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have checked the boundaries myself instead of trusting Karen's word. Rebuilding the dream. It took months to rebuild. I started with the chicken coop, bigger and safer than before. Then came a new greenhouse, a barn, and replanted gardens. Each weekend, something unexpected happened. Neighbors from Oak Ridge Estates stopped by, offering to help. I always liked your farm, one woman admitted as she helped plant tomato seedlings. Karen didn't speak for all of us. Lisa Martinez became a regular visitor, bringing her kids to learn about growing vegetables. The HOA isn't all bad, she told me one day. I've been elected the new president, and we're changing the rules. More sustainability, less control. A community transformed. 6 months after the fire, I held an open house at my rebuilt farm. To my amazement, half the neighborhood showed up, curious to see what I had created. Children squealed with delight at the friendly chickens. Adults admired the neat rows of vegetables and the solar panels on my new barn. Is it true you're going to teach gardening classes? One man asked. I nodded. Every Saturday morning, free for anyone who wants to learn. 1 year later, a year to the day after I found my farm in ashes, I stood watching the sunrise over my thriving land. The garden was more productive than ever. My new heritage chickens laid eggs with deep orange yolks that neighbors now lined up to buy. The greenhouse allowed me to grow vegetables year-round. The same TV reporter who had covered the fire returned for a follow-up story. How do you feel now, she asked, looking at all you've rebuilt? I smiled, watching bees buzz around my flowering apple trees. I learned that good fences and proper property surveys make good neighbors, I said. But I also learned that one person's hatred doesn't define a community. As for Karen, after serving her sentence, she sold her house at a loss and moved away. The young family who bought it now brings their children to my weekend gardening classes. The HOA still exists, but it's different now. Under Lisa's leadership, the HOA shifted its focus to community building rather than control. In fact, they even partnered with me to create a neighborhood farmers market in the park. The final lesson. That one legal detail Karen forgot to check, the property line that my farm technically stood outside of, didn't just save my land. It transformed an entire community. And it taught us all what really matters: respecting each other's right to live as we choose,